All right. Well, we are live with the Word on the Block. This is a Tuesday edition, and I'm going to tell you guys something. I'm excited. I have a fellow Texan on with us today, and most importantly, a fellow Dallas Cowboys fan. But more importantly, really an icon in the auction industry. Probably one of the most humble people you'll meet. So he will not want me to give his full bio, and I will allow him to tell you all about himself very soon. But hey, Mike McGavel Jones is with us today with the Word on the Block. Mike, thank you so much for joining us from Dallas, Texas.
I'm happy to be here, Shane. Very excited to be with you. And anytime we're talking about auctions, I'm excited.
Well, and I know, from the last 7 or 8 years with me in the auction industry, I have kind of cyber stalked some people. And I'll just divulge this to you now. You're one of those people, so don't be surprised if I know a little more than you anticipated about you. But there's a reason for that. And just a little bit of history while I look down at my phone. Please excuse the brevity. I'm going to share it a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit through kind of the direction I want to take this. This is 100% informal, unscripted. Mike and I had actually never talked face-to-face prior to this, and it's really the way I wanted it to be. I have said from the beginning of this, I wanted this kind of be like what happens at Conference and Show after all the formal stuff. And what I have found about the auction industry is that's kind of when the magic is. You know, you can go and you can learn because education's important. But man, at the state and national conventions, I have learned more in the hallways and maybe over some coffee, maybe sometimes over an adult beverage. But that's kind of the direction I want to go with this. And if you don't know, I'm going to give Mike just a second. If you don't know about Mike Jones and what he's about, it really runs the gambit. I mean, 40 plus years between in the auction industry, 35 plus, we'll say, without giving his age. Been a realtor since the 80s. Is of course locked up with fundraisers all over the country. I mean, I have watched you do that, doing great things there. Obviously, the president of United Country. US SCS, I believe is what you guys call it. But let's let Mike tell you about himself, and let's get this shared on a couple of the social media platforms. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, thanks for having me on, Shane. First off, and it is kind of, it's awkward to just talk about yourself because I've been around a long time, so a lot of people already know me. And bottom line is, I started out going to auctions when I was a kid back in the 60s with my grandfather. He was a huge influence on me. He's probably the main reason that I was interested in auctions because that's what we did for fun from about 65, 66 until the early 70s. And that was our entertainment. We went to auctions. We went to all kinds of sales. We did a weekly auction and just attending. We were buyers and sellers at a consignment auction. And then my mother remarried. We ended up in California. My parents went to auctions. And they bought antiques and collectibles and clocks from Europe and all kinds of depression glass and all kinds of things. And then get back to Houston, Texas in 1972, which I know you and I talked about. You lived in Pasadena growing up as a kid. And so that's kind of in 72, started going to 8th grade. And next thing you know, in high school, in my junior year, I was working for a meat locker and got burned in an industrial accident. And I was home and I was kind of recovering. And my mother asked me what I was going to do. And I said, I don't know. I'm not going back to the meat plant, which was over off the old Katy Road off of 610, where the Houston Area Rapid Transit bus barn is located. She said, well, the auctioneer's looking for some people to unload the antiques from Europe off of the containers. And I said, sure. I went and saw him, and for about $2 an hour, and it was $2. That was the number, $2 an hour. We were unloading containers, and I did that my junior year and into my senior year. And then after high school, I went up to North Texas State to study journalism. But I found myself recurring and going back to Houston just about every week and working the auctions. And after my first year of college was not very impressive, to say the least. And there's nobody going to write a positive book about my first year of college. First off, I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be, I was really into wheeling and dealing. I wanted to make deals and I wanted to be a businessman. And I really, even though I love journalism, that was probably one of my first loves. I really wanted to do business, and I'd go back and I'd work those events. And then after the first year, my mother said, well, you need to either really apply yourself in college, or you really need to think about either taking a year off or figuring out what you want to do. And about that time I said, well, I'm thinking about it. And she turned around, and this is a true story. We're sitting in the kitchen. She reached around and pulled the drawer open and pulled out an envelope from Missouri Auction School at that time. And she said, you might want to think about this. You might want to look into that if you want to do it. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. This was like in June, July. I guess it was July. I said, the first week of September is when you have to go back to North Texas for orientation for your second year and all that, and pre-registration and all the nonsense that goes along with it. And I said, the morning that I'm supposed to go back to college, I'm gonna set my alarm to go back. It's about a 4-hour drive, maybe 4.5. Not for me. It was about 3.5 for me. And so I told her, I said, when I wake up, I'm either going to get up, go get in my car and drive to North Texas, or I'm going to hit the button, go back to sleep, and go to auction school in November. And so I woke up, I rolled over, and I turned the alarm off, went back to sleep, and put in hard time working in Houston, and of course in the heat, because it seems like it's always humid and hot in Houston. And we were busy and we were working, and so I worked right up until the time that I headed off to Missouri in November, the last week of November, right after Thanksgiving, and graduated from school. It was a 2-week school back then. Finished 2 weeks of auction school and came back with my colonel certificate, my little diploma from Dick DeWeese, and took my test, and I received my state license on January the 9th, and had my first auction on April 7th, I believe it was. And we've been in the business ever since.
Of 1978.
79.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was a consignment sale, and it was just odds and ends. The entire sale brought less than $4,000. My advertising budget was $75, and ended up we did that consignment sale that turned into. And a guy walked up, an older guy in his probably 70s or 80s, and he said, hey, would you mind looking at my sister's estate? And I said, sure, I'll be happy to. Of course, you got to remember, at that time, I was 20 years old. Sure. And looked probably, 16 or 17. Went down the street, probably 10 blocks, looked at that estate, booked that deal, then turned around, and his other brother asked me to do their auction down in Decatur, Texas, or Bridgeport, Texas. And that would just kind of kicked it. It seemed like every week I'd meet somebody that wanted to have an auction. And that started off our estates and antiques. In 1980, I got into radio. I'd been wanting to do radio all along. So I was doing a radio show in Bowie, Texas. And ironically, I did the morning drive. I'd go on at 6 in the morning, go till 9, and did all the farm reports and got to know all the local people. And then I started promoting the auction business. And so I was getting auctions because I was a radio disc jockey and news reporter. And then I get a phone call. I'd been trying for about a year to get Western Auto to pay attention to me. Western Auto Supply Company, which was based in Kansas City. I mean, if you go to Kansas City, the iconic Arrow is downtown. Sure. Most people would know that sign from Back to the Future because it's in that movie. And so anyway, I got to do about 200 or 300 of those stores. Because of that, I got into more retail, selling True Values and Ace Hardwares and HWI and Century Hardwares and every kind of retail store you can imagine. Sold half of my downtown of where I grew up. And then that led to the real estate in 83, got my real estate license. And then started doing some retail, then industrial. Met some really cool people in the late 80s and the 90s. Got into doing Textron Finance and GE Capital. Started selling industrial facilities from coast to coast and Mexico and places like that, and liquidating the plants. I'm going to tell you that NAFTA, which we're all very familiar with NAFTA, NAFTA was not good for the United States, even though a lot of people were pushing hard for it. They wanted that corridor from Canada to Mexico. all it did was destroy the economic base of the manufacturing base here in the United States. I'm very adverse to that, and I have a lot of problem with it. I have a problem with every president that pushed for it, and that's on both sides. And so I think NAFTA was a big destroyer of this country, and that's why we've been trying to get it back. Because I'm one of the guys that was selling off America, one machine at a time.
Sure.
And then, of course, that went on, and we got into the real estate business. And because I was president of the National Auctioneers Association, and, I'm a huge advocate, past president, 04, 05, won the IC in 98. And then they were nice enough to put me in the Hall of Fame in 2012. But because I was president, or actually I was past president, I was the chairman of the board when Dan Duffy with United Country Real Estate discovered me and said, hey, I'd like for you to come on board and start the auction division for United Country, which was at that time about an 85-year-old company in Kansas City. And I said, and I was not interested at all. Been running my own company for 27 years. I had no interest in joining anybody or being told what to do by anybody. And I told him, I said, I'm the worst candidate you've ever had for a position. And he said, and I said, I can't work for somebody else. And he said, you're not going to work for anybody else. It's your division. You create it, you start it, you make it happen. So they hired me to come on. At the same time, we brought on Sean Terrell. That's overrunning the auction division over in Kansas City now. And, we started that auction division, and now we have the company has the opportunity to do auctions in all, 500-600 offices that we have. And then during that time, we created United Real Estate, which is an urban brand, and that's in all the major cities. We've got about 125 of those. And the company does about $6 or $7 billion a year. And I've just been along for the ride. And now it's 14 years later. And I'm sitting in Dallas running United SCS, which is an internal brokerage that I started about 6-7 years ago. And I will continue to run SCS here in Dallas. And after this pandemic that we've been in and having some time at home, I made the decision to cut down on the travel. I'm a diamond on Delta and got a couple million points on Southwest. And quite frankly, if people have been living to watch to see where I'm going next, they're going to be terribly disappointed because I'm cutting back on the trips. So that's kind of where we are right now.
I think it's amazing from start to finish, if you really think about that. Something that I have found, Mike, is in the auction industry, if you are in this particular industry to make a lot of money, and that's the only reason you're here, you're probably not going to make it. As a military guy, when I came into the auction industry, I found out how easy it is to find people who are successful. There's a lot of successful auctioneers. And I think that the younger guys, and I always refer to myself as a younger guy. I'm 40 in a few months, but in the auction industry, I'm 7 or 8 years old.
You're a young guy.
But
after you hit 60 and you go over 60, 40-year-old guys just make you upset.
I understand. I spent the earlier part of my adult life mentoring and growing younger leaders in the military. So when I speak to young auctioneers, everybody thinks that all you do is show up on Saturday morning or Friday afternoon or whenever the auction is, and you get up on the block and you get your precious chant, and then you sell large assets. And I think it's important that if you're out there and you're one of those folks that have been in the industry, for a short period of time, and maybe you're the person selling lot boxes at the end of the auction, or maybe you're the person selling pots and pans. I mean, it's important to hear folks like you who I would say is in my top 10 list of just super successful. But you started, as you just said, loading European imported furniture at a consignment auction. And those baby steps are difficult sometimes for even people like me. I'm a serial entrepreneur. All my life, I've had 2 jobs. I've always bought, sold, traded things, even when I was in the military, because frankly, you don't make enough money to live a lifestyle that you want to while you're on active duty. So I think that's important. And that really is what captivated me about what you just said. Of all your accolades, of all the things, I mean, come on, Hall of Famer, at the National Auctioneers Association, obviously an IEC champ in '98. They call you the Triple Crown winner because not only are you a president, but an IEC champion and a Hall of Famer. But really, it all started with humble beginnings. I mean, isn't that the American auctioneer story? I mean, it wouldn't that kind of the way you would want your story to be told, is that you didn't get anything handed to you. You didn't become a president of a multi-billion-dollar company because of your good hair, because you're in the same club I am. Isn't that kind of the story?
I think it all goes back to your roots. I think you have to. I think you have to start with humble beginnings. When I was a kid, my mother was married to a gentleman that lived on a dairy farm, and we were on a dairy farm back in the early '60s, from around '63 to '66. And when you live on a farm, you understand what hard work is, and you get to see it up front, and you get to see what not really having anything but what you grow or what you produce is the end result. And it's basically this: get up at 4, milk the cows, go to the house, clean up, go to school, get out at 3, bring in the cows at 4, and milk till you get done. And then on the weekend, it's the same thing, except you get to go to church on Sunday. We didn't go to town every week. That just didn't happen. And then we ended up back in town. My mother was divorced, and it was just me and her. And we lived on a railroad track. I tell people that, I don't want not to anybody feel sorry for me, but for people to understand, I understand what not having a lot is. We lived in about 110, 120 square foot house, not a room. It was a house on a railroad track. So we were talking about that the other day, and they said, wow. And I said, yeah. I said, if the train derailed, your dog got killed. But the fun thing for me is, I always swore I'd never go back to Gainesville, Texas. I loved it when I was a kid, and I loved it growing up. And I was there in '79 when I started the auction company. I had a couple of convenience stores and service stations and full service gas stations. And I pumped gas. Even when I was starting my auction company, I was wearing an outfit. I was wearing a Texaco shirt with red suspenders, and I was checking oil and putting air in tires and cleaning windshields. And, that is not the life of luxury. And you don't look like you're the life of luxury. We just worked hard, and we wanted to make it. And then when those opportunities came, it was very appreciated. And so being a first generation auctioneer, I understand. And I understand the uphill battle that kids have today. When I say kids, you can be a 50-year-old kid to me, because you feel the same way. It's like just getting started. We see that a lot at the 2 auction schools that we run. You got people coming to auction school in their 70s going, God, I wish I'd have been here 30 years ago. Or I wanted to go 40 years ago, and I couldn't do it because I had 2 kids and a wife, and I just couldn't stop because I had to make a living. Now here I am, 65, 70 years old. Do you think I can do it? I said, you can do anything you want to if you want to bad enough, but you better turn up the heat and get to work if you're going to make it happen. And yes, the business has changed a tremendous amount. And I was telling you a minute ago, I just did an interview an hour ago with a major national magazine. And those are the kind of questions they're asking me. What's the difference between the auction business today and when it was when you started in 1978? And I'm telling them the difference, and the differences are large. It's the whole game has changed. But when you talk about being humble, I think it's all about, I was very fortunate that my second mentor, I lost both of my mentors in the last 14 months. And so both of them, the one that hired me in Houston and the one that hired me in Dallas, which was Joe Small, who is in the Hall of Fame of the National Auctioneer Association. And Joe hired me here in Dallas. He didn't know me from Adam. The only reason he hired me is because Dick DeWeese and Missouri Auction School said, you need to go see Joe Small. He'll hire you. I said, okay. So I don't know what Joe thought he was getting, but I did go see him, and he gave me a job. And the funny thing is, I was working at a radio station making probably $800 a month plus whatever commissions I could make on sales. Joe hired me, and I was making $100 a night for 3 hours. And then he went to 2 nights a week. Now I'm making $800 a month for 12 hours work compared to an entire month working for the radio station. And so, I stayed on there as long as I could. I stayed in radio for 3 or 4 years because I enjoyed it. But at a certain point, it became a disruptor, and I
Sure.
just had to do something else. But Joe was a very successful auctioneer, great guy, great human being, didn't have any kids, kind of adopted me as one of his sons or a son. And, but I think my grandfather had more influence on me than anybody else. He was very humble. I don't think I ever heard him brag about anything. He died at 72, and that was tough for me because he was my best friend and my travel mate. And so when I was a kid, he took me with him on trips, wherever it was, could be to a coffee shop. But then when I was old enough to, he retired when he was around 65. And for the last 7-8 years of his life, I took him with me wherever I went. If it was a flight, I'd put him on the flight with me, because that was my greatest joy, was give back to him what he had done for me.
That's awesome. And, I think it's something that I wish I heard more. And I believe, in the new millennials, and, I didn't share this with you. I have 6 children, 5 of which that are girls, one at Texas A&M right now, one that's dancing weirdly in the hallway right now next to me as well. But, I think the millennials and the X and the Y, whatever you want to call them, they get a bad rap. But I don't really believe in a lot of the things that are being said. And I'll tell you why, because I serve next to many of them. And I often tell people, if you think about anytime that you want to think about that generation, think about our military force right now. And if you look at the statistics of the people between the age of 18 and 23 that are serving on active duty right now, unlike when you were of age, in my parents' age, you didn't know if you were going to go to war or not. And if you were, then you were drafted. But now, this generation that gets a lot of flack, for me, these are the guys that I know, and ladies and gentlemen, that signed on the dotted line, knowing that it was likely within the next 18 months that they were going to go into combat, and not drafted. But I mean, and that's something that we need to give those folks more credit for. But what I was going to get to with your story is, I really believe that it's going to come full circle. Everything does, right? Bell bottoms are back in, and corduroy's cool, and mid-century modern furniture and all that. I think it's going to come around to where, I've got a 17-year-old boy. He's the only boy in the house, other than me, of course, and our puppy dog. But, he understands what a handshake means. He understands what a full day's work means. And he works in the auction business with me. My 8-year-old helps us at times. But it's just important to be grounded and humbled. And I really believe that the auction industry allows for that. And you're a product of that. And I just wanted that not to go unnoticed. That, I think there's some younger folks that are coming through that I get to serve with on the board here in Tennessee, and that I've met through the National Auctioneers Association, that, I think the auction industry is alive and well as far as the younger generation goes, because of folks like you that we've kind of get to watch through your journey as well.
Well, I appreciate that. We all get a little full of ourselves every once in a while. I've been guilty of it, and I don't mean to. I think what happens is you just have some success, and if success keeps going, as you well know, and we talked about this, I do a lot of fundraisers, and I'm very blessed to get to do a lot of cool events with a lot of major organizations and a lot of groups here in Dallas. Literally, if I walked away from United Real Estate or United Country tomorrow, I'm never going to have a problem finding a job. That's a beautiful thing about an auctioneer, is if you walk away from one thing, there's no reason in the world why you can't find a job doing something else. It's an unlimited opportunity, but you just have to learn. You have to learn the skills. And that's, I think, surrounding yourself with good people and enjoying yourself. If you love what you do, I've said this for years, and you hear it, it's so redundant. And I just heard it the other day. We were on a podcast with somebody, and they said, if you love what you do, well, in fact, Kenny Rogers was very clear about it. He said it for many years. If you love what you do, you're really never going to work. And it's not work. Listen, nobody has worked harder than me or my crew when it came down to doing what you got to do and getting hot and getting sweaty and going 24 hours and 25 hours. I'll tell you something funny. Back in the early years, my very first $100,000 sale was a White's Auto store, which was kind of a knockoff of Western Auto. And White's Auto was born in Wichita Falls, Texas, and they had locations throughout Texas and Oklahoma and Mexico, and they were trying to be a Western Auto. And at one time, Western Auto had over 6,000 stores, because there was no Walmart and there were no Costco's. Western Auto was the Walmart. They sold everything but food. And you literally bought your shotgun, your beach ball, your Stingray bicycle, whatever you wanted, your appliances. And they would finance it too, because you got to remember, we lived in an age when there were no credit cards. When I got in the auction business, credit cards were just coming out. In fact, they really weren't anything to talk about until the 80s. And so everybody was carrying paper. We call it carrying paper, and nobody knew what that meant. But it would be, you go to the Western Auto store and you tell the guy there, hey, I'd like to buy that freezer. And then you would sign on the dotted line. It'd be like 16 pages of paperwork. And now you're paying 20% interest on a freezer that, costs $800. It was kind of like the company store in Kentucky or West Virginia. But I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned about that. And so anyway, that first $100,000 White's Auto store down in Texas, it started at 9 o'clock. Now you got to remember, this is the place where I bought skate keys and things that kids today don't even know what they are. But that's where we got, like the first bicycle, that kind of stuff. You could buy your tires there. And so we started at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, and we finished around 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, and literally ran 24 to 25 hours. And I had, I think, 3 or 4 of those sales in about a 5-year period, where they literally started one auction, we had to stop it. We literally stopped like at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning and said, guys, everybody's tired. This was in Azle, Texas, and it was a Western Auto. I said, let's go home. And I want you all, and there was still a lot of people there, but we were just all beat. And, and we just said, we'd like for you to go to church in the morning, tell everybody the auction's starting at 1 o'clock. And we had 300, 400 people there at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And we went all the way around the clock again. It was just that much stuff. Because, back then everything was trial and error. Nobody knew. No, we didn't know. It was 1984, 85. We were just doing the best we could. 2-day sales, and nobody was doing 4-day auctions. You would do a 1 or a 2-day sale. Now today, I can tell you, with matter of factly, I'm going to start an auction at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm shutting that sucker down at 3 or 4, no matter what. And if we have to come back 4 days or 5 days or whatever, we will. But it's just a different time. I had a conversation with the gal a little while ago, and the reporter that called me, and we were having a conversation. It's the same conversation I had with Dan Dotson from Storage Wars the other day. I don't know if you saw it, but we did a podcast with Dan. And
he talked a little bit.
Huh?
He talked a little bit throughout that.
Well, that's just Dan. I asked him what was the biggest change he had seen in the last 45 years, because we're about the same age. And he said, technology. And that's a softball. I said, yes, I agree. Technology is absolutely the biggest change. But I also think one of the biggest changes is, the merchandise we sell and what we can and cannot sell today that we used to sell before 1995 when eBay came on. Once eBay came on, all those classifications of assets that we built our businesses on in the estate business and the antique business, whether it was Fostoria glass or it was, any collectible, depression glass is an example. Entire classes of different types of assets are no longer even sellable at an auction. And you'll do good to put them in a box and get somebody to bid on them unless you put something in it. And I think that's a huge change, because the public today is not patient. They've got I call it the Walmart mentality. They want everything right now. They don't have to wait for it. And literally anything that you and I have, unless it's one of one and has a serial number to dictate that, they don't have to involve themselves, and they don't have to wait for it. So you have to give them every opportunity. Do not build barriers to your assets. You have to make it as easy as possible for people to buy whatever the heck they're going to buy.
I love that you said that, because this is going to segue into something that that has become a hot topic for me. And I don't, I want to give Mike Brantley the credit for it because I think I heard it from him first. It's not anything that he came up with, but I think he kind of wrapped it all up into one for me. And this, and what you said, and, I don't care if it's with United Country or if it's with, Billy Bob's Auction Barn on Wednesday night, doesn't matter, across the board. I'm surprised by the mentality, because I think that time is the most precious asset that any of our consumers have. And I think that, for asking them to sit down, because I would still do it, just for the record, I'll sit for 8 hours. And my wife will tell you, if I say I'm going to an auction, I'm going to be one of the last people there, still to this day.
Shane, you have 6 kids. There's a reason you're not going home.
True story. But, and it's funny.
I mean that with love and respect.
Believe me. Don't let me forget to tell you about how I found out that auctions were therapeutic to me also, because it's important. But what I was going to get at is, if Amazon, for example, and we talked about this before, Amazon has very simple terms. You find what you want. It's a click and ship mentality. We know that if we don't like it, we're going to be able to return it. We know it's going to be here in 2 days. There's all these guarantees to me as a consumer. Okay. Mother's Day is just around the corner. A few days ago, bam, I bought something. I keep asking if it's here. It's going to be here. I'm getting anxious. It's been 2 days. Where is it? Mother's Day's coming. I haven't no other plan. If you read through the terms and conditions just randomly, go to Google, hit auction, read through terms and conditions. I haven't looked at United Country, but I would assume that you guys have relatively lengthy, because it's just like our contracts in the auction business. Every auction, they get a little bit longer because, so there's some scenario that we need to cover. Do you think the future of the auctions, the future of the auction business becomes a more consumer friendly, less terms and conditions, if you will, less as is, where is, take it or leave it, pay us this way, pick it up when we tell you, and more of an eccentric customer relations business? Because what I see is we're going to have to separate ourselves, because we're not Amazon, we're not Walmart, and we're sometimes we're selling one of one, but ultimately, like, I want to be positioned in the front of everybody else. But I think that's going to have to be, we're going to have to maybe accept returns, or maybe allow financing on some of our as-is properties, or, what's creative and what's going to position us differently in the industry to where we can appeal to the people that have been buying stuff and getting it within 24 hours their whole life.
Well, we don't want to get disenfranchised, do we?
No.
So the way and we study this kind of stuff all the time. We do it with the real estate business. We do it with the machinery and the heavy equipment. I believe that we're going to fall in somewhere in between. I don't think we're going to throw away what has worked for us for the last 70 years, but I do believe that we're going to have to find a happy medium. When I got in the auction business, my terms and conditions were like 10. There were like 10 of them. I can take you right now, 20 feet from here, there's one of my original bidder cards with the original terms and conditions. And it's very clear, very easy, very simple. It was not litigious. Now listen, real estate is a bit different. Your sellers have expectations, and you cannot throw away the relationship with the seller by saying the buyer controls everything. So I don't believe that's going to happen. But I don't believe that we can buy into let me tell you this, and I am firm about this. If we buy in to the belief that returns are going to work for us, we're going to be out of business. We can't liquidate companies. I think what's going to happen is auctions are going to be redefined on what they are. A liquidation auction will be an important piece. I think a liquidation auction is going to have one set of terms. I think when you're selling new assets that can be returned, that have been unused, I think that, and there are people, and as you well know, in our industry right now, we can get online and find an auction where they're selling brand new stuff. To me, it's no different than a TV auction. That's all that is. QVC. When I was a kid, and you were a kid, well, no, when I was a kid, in Houston, in Houston, Texas, there was the funniest TV show on, and because I was on the front end of cable in Houston. Okay, I mean there was like 4 channels. You had the 3 mains, you had PBS, and then you had 1 or 2 upstart cable channels. One of them was a funny auction show, and it was a goofy guy, but he was selling brand new merchandise, and it was really kind of a scam. I mean, he was getting you to buy, CZs and all this stuff. The stuff wasn't worth much, but I learned something by watching that. And I do believe, and guess, as you well know, a lot of our auctioneers, folks that are actually watching right now, they understand that there's warehouses full. Look, there's little old ladies with 5 warehouses with QVC stuff. I remember one time selling an entire home. It was like a 3-bedroom house. The woman lived in one little space and went to the restroom and went to the kitchen, and every square inch of the rest of that house was stuff from QVC. Dolls, jewelry, and things that had never been opened. It was all boxed up. Barbie dolls, stuff like that. I do believe that there is a place for things like that that could possibly be sent back, but I also believe they would have to pay a deposit. There'd be a deposit. It's a non-refundable deposit. It's almost like a restock fee, right?
Sure.
But when it comes to real estate, or it comes to a piece of equipment that has specialty pieces on it, that once it leaves, that's kind of the benefits of going to an auction. That's kind of the what Dan and them called finding the treasure in the warehouse. People, remember, they're paying their price. Now, I do believe 100% that financing is going to become a factor, whether we have our own relationship with a credit card company, which I advocated 20 years ago with the National Auctioneer Association. I wanted to have a credit card for all members to solicit their buyers to acquire. Of course, the comment back to me was, we're just not big enough. Well, you don't get bigger if you don't do bigger things. And I'm a big believer in bigger things. And so, that's one of the first things that I would do is if I had the right group of people, if I had the right database, we were having a conversation earlier today. Manheim, even here in Dallas, probably has 20,000 registered dealers here in Dallas-Fort Worth. 20,000 people, a lot of people.
Sure.
If I can get 20% or 30% of those people to take a credit card in my company name, you can't tell me that's a bad thing. So I think credit's a big deal. And now that we have this new situation with the health scare and the pandemic and the COVID-19, I think we're going to have to step out and look at every possible thing that we can possibly do to enhance people back to our auctions, because we're not out of this. And people are not just going to wake up tomorrow and say, hey, the governor said we're open for business and come to my auction. It's not going to happen. And it's no different than in the NAA convention scheduled for July. I know they've said we're planning on doing it. But you know what? San Diego hasn't said that we can do it. And California hasn't said we can do it. It's just that we're hoping we get to do it. So I think we are going to have to offer some simpler terms and conditions, make it easier for people to buy, go out of our way a little bit to let them pick up their stuff instead of being so rigid and saying, you have to be here at this time or you can't do it. Listen, it may cost us a little bit more money. Maybe we pass the cost on to our seller. There's things you can do. I believe.
I love that, because evolution is what needs to happen, right? I mean, we have to continue to evolve. It's one of the depends on what record you believe, but it's maybe the first, second, or third, oldest industry, if you will. And I think we're going to have to continue to evolve. And I always kind of say, growing up and I was born in '80. I don't know if Toys R Us was a big deal in anybody else's life, but we weren't very wealthy growing up. But if I got to go to Toys R Us, it was a big deal. Toys R Us was the best place to go get toys. But guess what? They're not around anymore. They're gone. I mean, just gone, like Western Auto, because I think it's the inability or the lack of evolution for the industry, right?
I want,
And I want to segue into something. If you'll look in the corner, you did something, in Mike Jones fashion recently. And you've had America's Auction Academy, which was previously Texas Auction Academy, and I know that that was a really big deal, super successful. And I want to give him a shout out, because if I don't, I got to just let you know. Jay Cash has been kind enough. He's in Murfreesboro, and he's been kind enough to haul me all over the country the last couple of years doing fundraising auctions with him. And somehow we got hooked up with this guy named Josh Kirby. He went to America's Auction Academy when it was Texas, and Kelly Kirby and a couple of the other guys. And I'm telling you, Mike, I swear to you, 20 minutes before you logged on, I called Josh and I said, listen, I have heard about Mike Jones so much that from you, I want you on this show. And guess what he's doing? He's booking a deal right now in true Josh Kirby fashion.
I'm proud of him. I'm proud of him. I would rather him be booking an auction. I'll tell you something funny. I don't know if you've ever met Brad Woolley. Brad Woolley is from Little Rock, and Brad Woolley, he has been, he may still be the chairman of the board for the licensing board. He's also been the past presiding officer for NALOA. So, I mean, Brad's been a player for a long time. His dad, and Brad's taught at our school in Dallas. And his son, Brad Jr., came through our school, and he went home. He won the state championship and all this stuff. Well, the grandfather, was one of my first instructors. And he's in the Hall of Fame. And so B.H. Woolley is an icon. I mean, anybody that's 80 years old or older with the National Auctioneers Association knows who B.H. Woolley was. And he owned Little Rock. If it was a bankruptcy or an SBA sale, and he'd sold cars all over the southeast of Arkansas, but his stories were phenomenal. So it was a blessing to have him with us. And he's one of these guys that he was single. He drank martinis. He smoked cigarettes, and he bought baby clothes for my daughter, who's outside of this room and is 26, getting ready to turn 27. But the cool thing about and BH would say, if I said, well, I've got to go book an auction, and he would, I don't know what it was. It was like setting a fire. He'd say, you are not booking an auction. You are contracting an auction. Yeah. And if I said sale, he didn't like that. If I said, well, we're going to have a sale. No, you're having an auction. And I can't remember what year. I cannot remember what year BH was president. You'd have to look it up, of the NAA, but it was in the 60s. Okay. But that's back when they were tough and tumbling and almost getting in fist fights over stuff. It was a different time in the 60s. I'm just telling you, his stories were of a legend. And so anyway,
America's Auction Academy has been around. It was Texas Auction Academy. Now it's America's Auction Academy. And you did something crazy, Mike Jones fashion recently, and you acquired, as I understand, with a couple other great Texans, the Worldwide College of Auctioneering. And now you're running educational institutes for the auction industry in multiple states under multiple names. So talk to us about that and kind of what that transition looks like and how exciting it is. And obviously, what a tough time, right? No school's happening right now.
I think I was heavily under the influence of something when, I can tell you this, Lori Jones, who's been with me for, 15 years, and people are confused about this because they go, well, I thought y'all were married. And I said, yes, we were married, and now we're not married. But the great thing about it is we have such a great relationship. She still works with me. She still runs the school. Then about 6-8 months ago, I said, hey, I'm thinking about buying Worldwide. And she said, and why in the world would you do that? And I said, I don't know. It just seems like the thing to do. And she said, well, I don't understand how you buy Worldwide because you're competing against yourself. And I said, well, no, because America's Auction Academy has a certain curriculum, a certain style. We really push the business side of the business. That's our strong suit, is teaching people how to run companies. And by the way, we'll teach you the chant. And obviously we're doing something right there. We got Barrett Bray, we got Cody, Shelley. I mean, we're creating champion auctioneers, but we're also teaching them the business. I want people to understand that we want to keep the way Worldwide ran their school. It really was known as a chant school. It was never meant to be a business school. It was meant to, in fact, they have signs at the school that we still put up. We've had two classes. We were with them in November, and I only went to observe. Lori and I flew up and we observed the class. I didn't even give input until the last day. So I wanted Paul C. Bear to do his deal and Vicki to do her deal one last time on their own, and it was out of respect for them, but also to learn and to see their instructors and find out what the heck we were buying, and then turn around, and we actually did handle the class in February from beginning to end. Of course, Vicki has stayed on with us, so that's a huge plus. Vicki was one of the partners in the school. She was a true partner with Paul C. And so she stayed on with us, and she's one of our favorite people. And probably if she's not watching, she'll watch this at some point. But the bottom line is we wanted to keep the two schools uniquely different. Craig and Angie Meyer, who are my partners in that deal, they are strong with the chant, strong with ring work. That's their forte. They love to do that. And Craig and I both agreed going in the door that we wanted to keep Worldwide as much the same as we possibly could. Now, I wasn't kidding about wondering what the hell I was doing, because, you don't plan for a pandemic.
Sure.
We had planned on having an advanced bid calling seminar in May. Obviously, we're not doing that. We are going to do it. In fact, Shane Ratliff, who's one of the greatest auctioneers in the United States, former IAC champion, works out of Chicago. He was lined up to do that class here in Dallas. He is going to be with us. We're either going to do it later in the year in Dallas or we're going to do it in Chicago, one or the other. And you just kind of go with the flow. I can tell you this, as it stands today, and this is late breaking news. You're the first person to know this. So I'm putting it out there. And so the world can get excited or go, he's a crazy son of a gun. But we are going to have our class the 28th. I believe it's the 28th. You'll have to look at the exact date, whatever Friday that is, May the 28th or 29th, whatever it is, through the first 29th. Okay, May 29th through June the 5th. I believe that's the following Friday. But here's the twist, and you get to hear it first. We have reached an agreement with the state of Texas, with the Texas Workforce Commission, and with Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, and we are going to do the first simulcast live auction school at America's Auction Academy, and that will be a part of this class. We will have people in the classroom based on the number of people the County of Dallas is willing to allow us to have. So we'll do the maximum count of people in the room, and that's all good. And we're going to adhere to whatever the government says, reluctantly, but we also want people to be safe, and we're going to adhere to the rules. But if someone out there wants to join that class from here to Indonesia or South Africa, they can, and all they got to do is get online and let us know they want to be a part of it. We have the technology. We have secured the technology to actually format it to where we can see every student from the time they sign on to the time they sign off. They are timed. There'll be no discounting the 80 plus hours that we do, and they'll have to perform just like anybody else would in the classroom. So this is a first. This will be the first attempt, and I have no doubt that if it works for us in the first week of June, then we're probably going to do the same thing with Worldwide, and we'll just go from there. But we're at the point, my friend, that with Zoom, with Skype, Facebook Live, this inevitably was going to happen. We wanted to do this 10 years ago. We were going to do it 5 years ago. We had a relationship with AT&T. We had the classrooms already set up to do green screens. We were going to do it then. And but I like innovation, and I believe it. If you're second, you know the view you're going to have, and so that's what's going to happen. Oh, America's Auction Academy.
That's awesome. Obviously, we didn't expect breaking news, but
well, that is breaking. That is breaking news right there.
Hey, but I think it's a testament, Mike, to what's going to have to happen, right? We've found out during this pandemic, and let's just be honest, it's been horrible. But in the real world, when we really step back and if you've had the chance to travel to second or third world countries and see that how spoiled we really are in America, honestly, just being blunt, this isn't that bad. Having to stay at home for a few weeks or go without work for a couple months, yeah, it's horrible. But in the big scheme of things, not that bad. This is awesome because what I like to see and what we've been trying in the Tennessee at the state level is to ease the barrier of entry. As you know, Tennessee is one of the strictest, or was one of the strictest law barrier of entries there are into the auction industry. And with the new task force and with some folks with the association, we were able to lower that barrier so we could get more folks in the auction industry. Lots of reciprocity comes out of Tennessee. So as you can imagine, we have to be careful to, from the education side, if you will, to make sure that those folks don't lose the reciprocity. But this is awesome. I love the fact that you're on the front edge of it, And like Mike said, it's on the screen. I think I got everything. Not the greatest typer on the fly, but americasauctionacademy.com. Check it out. Allows you to expand your classroom. No longer have to, heat to the fire code, if you will. So that's great. And, it's exciting. And I knew that when you announced it, because I watch your podcast and I get it live a lot of times. As a matter of fact, that cattle for the cattle industry that you did most recently, that was remarkable. I actually had an employee riding with me who's just one of those guys that's got 120 mama cow-calf pairs right down the road from us. And when that 3014 initiative, when the gentleman started talking about that, I mean, he literally was smiling ear to ear. So for the things that you do, whether if it's being on the front end of something like the simulcast auction school, or just bringing folks, into the limelight and helping all the industries, regardless if it's, contract auctioneers or if you're selling personal property or real estate, you're doing good stuff. And as like Tommy Anderson says, that auctioneers are always innovative. I love that. I promised you I wouldn't take more than an hour. We're 8 minutes away from that. I want to give you an opportunity to do something that I know is near and dear to your heart. And I'll just be completely transparent. I've been in the auction business for about 6.5, 7 years now. Been in the state level, state association for since the beginning, really, for 7 years. Lucky enough to be elected onto the board of directors the last couple of years. Last year was my first conference and show. I've been an NAA member for 3 years, but just being completely frank, it takes a lot of money to go to the conference and show. But a wise man once told me that, you only get out of these associations what you put into it. And, a few $1,000s, my wife and I are looking forward to San Diego, so I hope it happens. But talk to me about kind of your elevator speech as far as the NAA goes. And I want to say this before you start because it's important. There's a few things about Mike Jones that you need to know, but as far as I understand, this record still is standing. But he's not only was a president of the National Auctioneers Association, but an IEC champion in 1998. And I actually have that video queued up, but we're not going to do that. But I did watch it just for the record because I believe that competitive auctioneering is very important. I've had the opportunity to do that a couple times. And then most importantly, I think you would say out of the three, being elected into the National Auctioneers Association Hall of Fame is just kind of one of those lifetime milestones. So talk to the folks out there that may have been kind of like me, first 3 or 4 years as an auctioneer. I was in a state level, not not the national level. Those guys are doing big business. I'm not going to be able to learn anything from them. They talk about advertising budgets that are more than my commission checks, that type of scenario. Obviously, once I became engaged, I realized that's not the case. So why don't you tell them with all of your experience what you've found?
I'm going to give you a preface to this. I told you a minute ago where my first advertising budget was $75, and that was in 1979, April of 79. About 6 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, I received a wire from Costa Rica, actually from Atlanta, but it was for a Costa Rican property, where they sent us $690,000 in advertising. And I can tell you this matter of factly, had I not been a member of the National Auctioneers Association, I would have never had the opportunity to ever be a part of a property in Costa Rica, much less get a check for $690,000. So you have to understand, from very humble beginnings at just a general merchandise auction in Gainesville, Texas in the 60s, and then going to some antique auctions and then going to work for an auctioneer, the best thing that I ever did, and I'll share who said it. I did attend Missouri Auction School. Now, I run 2 auction schools, and I don't want you to go to Missouri Auction School, but if you did, that's fine. Go wherever you want to go. Just go to a great school. Go where there's great people. Mike Brantley and I are great friends. You want to go to Ohio? Go to Ohio Auction School, because Mike Brantley's the best of the best. But here's the deal. I hired Mike Brantley to teach at my school about 2 years ago. And I called him up and I said, Mike, you want to join up and teach at the school? And he said, my gosh, nobody's ever asked me to teach at another school. And I said, I know. I like the best. I want the best. And I said, I don't care that you are running another school. He said, well, I want to, but let me call the owners and make sure it's okay with them. So he called him, and he came back and he said, you bet. I said, okay. So Mike and I have become best of friends. I think he's one of the greatest guys in the world. Again, I wouldn't have ever had an auction school or known Mike Brantley or been with United Country or done anything else if it hadn't been for the National Auctioneers Association. So I'm leaving Missouri Auction School the first week of December 1978, and we finished our little test, which was really humorous. And then I had become really close to Gary Ryther. Gary Ryther is in Lawson, Missouri. Gary Ryther is in the Missouri Auctioneer Hall of Fame and the National Auctioneers Association Hall of Fame. He's taught at Missouri, where I met him, and then he taught at Mendenhall, and then he taught at Texas. And so he's just an accomplished auctioneer. He told me before I left auction school, he said, Mike, if you don't do anything else, and if you don't do anything else, I've told you in 2 weeks, join your state association and join the National Auctioneers Association. You won't regret it. I signed up immediately. That was the first week right after I got out of auction school. So it'd be the first week of December. And I've been a member for 42 years. And everything good that's happened to me in the business, every accolade that I've had outside of my state association, came because of the men and the women of the National Auctioneers Association. The greatest honor for me, besides the Hall of Fame was the pinnacle. But winning the IAC against your peers is huge. And in 1998, when that happened, that changed the game. And I will tell you, it changed my life. It changed the world. I won that IAC championship and then immediately got elected to the NAA Board of Directors. The next year, I spoke at around 18 state conventions. Those are people I would have never met. My sphere of influence is nationwide and international because of the National Auctioneers Association. I don't have a 1-minute NAA speech. It's not possible. All I can tell you is if you're an auctioneer, whether you've been in the business for 20 years or you've been in the business for 2 months, you absolutely must join the NAA and you must join your state association. And don't ever ask me which one if you don't have the money for both. You can find money to go to Six Flags. You can find the money to go to a St. Louis Cardinals game. You can find the money to get a tattoo. You can find the money to join those 2 associations. It's not much to ask to spend $500 a year on your profession when you look at what all the other professions pay to be a part of it. Not only that, the limited barrier going to auction school and becoming an auctioneer is unbelievable compared to any other major profession. I don't know Shane, I can't think of another profession in the world that you can spend $2,000 or $3,000 going to auctioneer school by the time you pay for your room and the fun auction and the everything else, the tuition, and make your money back the first time. The first time you do a real auction, you've paid for your education. You can't do it in college, can't do it in law school, and call it a profession. So all I'm going to do is I put it out there, and I challenge anybody to argue with me on that one, because you're never going to win the argument.
Yeah, and I agree from somewhat of a newcomer's perspective. For me, I think the amazing thing is, like, in the military, I never could walk up to a 2-star general, right? The guy that's at the pinnacle, that's leading the troops into combat, I never had access to him. I could never just call him. I couldn't ask him. I couldn't bounce ideas off of him. I couldn't ask him what he thought about my battle plan. I had to go up the chain of command, right? The auctioneer industry, and specifically the National Auctioneers Association, the leadership during these times, because this has been pretty difficult times for a lot of professionals. And I promise, Mike, we're done very soon.
Shane, just a second. Just so you know, I'm not in a rush, so you're fine. And okay. There's a pandemic. I've been sitting in that recliner all day today on my computer working. And before you finish this, I have to address there's a note here from Stephen Barr, my friend from Kentucky.
Oh, sure.
Stephen and I Stephen calls me one day and says, "Hey, do you want to go to the Final Four basketball championship here in Dallas?" And we did. We went to AT&T Stadium. He said, "How do you become a Kentucky colonel?" Well, I will tell you, if you know Stephen Barr, you can become a Kentucky colonel, because that proclamation from the governor is hanging in my office here in Dallas at the Galleria. So, Stephen, just so you know, it wasn't for naught. Your hard work in presenting it to me when I was in, I think it was Chattanooga, is hanging in my office. And here again, I wouldn't have become a Kentucky colonel or known Stephen Barr if it hadn't been for that. Anyway, you can keep going, but I'm not in a rush.
No, it's amazing to me, because during these times, I have personally reached out to people who are as high up in leadership within the NAA, and past presidents and past board members, with questions that, they probably knew the answer to 15 years ago. But what I have learned is, when you get into this industry, you don't really need to bang your head against the wall and try to reinvent things. You want to innovate, and you want to be leading edge. But if you have a question, you can call, the past presidents. You can call Tim Mass, if you want to, who is kind enough to live right down the road, and the Terry Walkers that are coming in as, these are Tennessee people that I know they are going to have a lot of responsibility and have in the national level. But guess what? Mike Jones, you can send him a message on Facebook, and the next thing you know, he's, they're responding to you. And that, for me, that's worth more money than I'll ever make in the auction industry. And I believe that if you don't get engaged and really feel that and understand it, you'll never really know what you're missing out on. So that's my plea. Just as 3 or 4 years now being a member and going to the NAA last year, I'll never miss it again. Barring a tragic accident or something just crazy, it was a life-altering experience. I was, lucky enough to obviously get to compete and make the finals, and that was great as well. But like I told you in the beginning of this, what happens in the hallway, what happens during fellowship, it's the master's degree, and what other industry can you do that? If you're a tile layer, are you going to be able to walk up to, as a journeyman, are you going to be able to walk up to, the best in your industry and ask them one-on-one questions? No, they're probably not going to talk to you. So
probably going to make you go to work for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I will tell you, anybody that wants to be successful in the auction business, listen, the biggest problem, and you and I were talking about this generation, and I don't disagree. The current generation is brilliant. There's a lot of really, really smart people in this generation. The biggest knock I've heard about this generation is the fact that they want everything now, kind of like that Walmart mentality. It's
Sure.
like, hey, I went to auction school. I got my diploma. I then went and passed my test. I've worked 3 auctions. Now I should be able to run an auction with, and a lot of them do believe that it's just instant and overnight. There is nothing instant and overnight anymore. Unless you grew up in the business and you had a family, or you were fortunate enough to have a mentor, you need to go work for somebody, and you need to go to work for somebody that everybody respects, not just anybody. You need to go to work for somebody that everybody looks up to and says, wow, because that's who you want to work for. Because as you move through life, people are going to go, oh, he used to work for so-and-so. Well, that can be good or that can be bad. Sure. Because that's just the way life is. So I would just recommend that anybody that's getting out of school or in the business or trying to get going, and maybe they're hitting their head on the wall and they just can't seem to make it, get out there. And Dan Dotson on Storage Wars, and I know a lot of people are like, oh man, Storage Wars. Listen to me. Dan Dotson started the hard way. He grew up in the business. He is not a joke. He just does a TV show. He was just smart enough to get in the business, and he did it on his own. He created the opportunity, and that's the reason that he has a national platform for online storage auctions. I had somebody send me a note the other day. They were upset because I was interviewing him. And I just, my thinking was, well, if you'd have thought of his idea, everybody would be upset with you. I think that's called capitalism. That's the free enterprise system. If you come up with the better widget and the better way of functioning and the better technology program or the best auction program, then you deserve the accolades and you deserve the money that comes with it. And I just share that with people. Go work for somebody that, pardon the expression, work for somebody that's badass. Because if you work for a badass that's respected, you'll become a badass and you'll be respected too.
Well, and I think the other thing is not, in the military, we learned you never want to be, we would sit at these tables in the boardrooms, right? Kind of like you guys do at United, I'm sure. And I always said it terrified me when I was in the meetings and I looked around and I was the smartest person in the room, right? Because there's times when you're the expert. And I always have said from the beginning of my auction career, I never want to be that person. I'm a sponge, okay? I want to learn about everything. I think that's why I love it, because once I think I kind of got a handle on one thing, then I shift and get a real estate license. Lord knows, I don't think you'll ever know everything there is about the real estate transactions, either traditional, open market or on at auction. But then it comes the benefits, and then it goes into the contract, and there's so much going on. And that's why I always say to our clients, and they'll say, we're interviewing. That's great. I want you to interview everybody. Just like you said, go to whatever auction school you want to. Make sure you're doing the research and make sure you're doing business with a professional, because there's a significant difference. And I don't know if you know Philip Traylor or not, but I was blessed just a few years ago. I worked for Philip Traylor full-time here in Clarksville, Tennessee, right outside of where Fort Campbell is, where I got out of the Army. And I had my own place for 4 years, Mike. Just like you said, I opened my own auction house. I apprenticed for 2 years. I worked, I built my own customer base. I built my own structure. I wrote my own standard operating procedures. And about 3 years into it, I looked up and went, what in the world am I doing? Because I'm recreating everything that already exists. And I was just stubborn. I mean, I'm a Marine at heart. I was in the Army and the Marines, but at the end of the day, sometimes I'm a jarhead. I got to learn the hard way, and I did. And I met Philip at an association, at the Tennessee Auctioneers Association rookie competition. And, he said something to me and said, hey, if you ever need anything, just let me know. He actually called me one day because he needed some help, and I went and helped him. And I went, you know what? I have got to get under your wing and learn. And he actually has said something like, I taught you everything I know, but it only took an hour, which of course isn't true, because humble people, that's the way they speak. But learning, finding somebody, like you said, that's respectable, because in any industry, there's folks that you want to align yourself with, and there's folks that you don't want to. And I think that that's so important. And I read something about you today about Walkade. You mentioned Storage Wars. I didn't know Walkade is an American Auction Academy graduate. Is that true?
He went to Texas Auction Academy back in the day.
Okay. Did you guys issue him that Texas shirt when he graduated?
Hey, I'm not going to go there. I'm just not. Hey, all I'm going to tell you is this is what I'll tell you about Walt. You know, he's been loyal to the school. He comes back to every fundraiser. He donates to the St. Jude and the Scottish Rite fundraiser every time. He's probably only missed a couple because he had auctions going on somewhere. But Walt has been tremendous about showing up and being front and center. He comes dressed just like he does his sales. And but it's like I said on that show the other day, you know, when Walt came to auction school, he had been an accountant for years, and he was miserable. His dream was to be an auctioneer, and you know, he just felt he was just the character they were looking for at the moment, and it came straight from A&E, and you know, I'll tell you, A&E actually had me fly out to Glendale, California. I told Dan about this. Dan didn't know this until we had a little private conversation. And I said, because let me tell you, he's very protective of his brand and what his company does. And I said, just so you know, I said, they had me come out to talk about doing a show, and they were ready to roll. They wanted to come to Kansas City and do a show about, you know, real estate auctions. And they wanted me to be the grandfather on Pawn Stars. And I told the guy, I got back to Texas and I just sat down and I thought, and I'll just tell you the truth. You know, I love this business so much. They offered me a great opportunity to have my own TV show. And I called them back and I said, I care more about my reputation, and I care more about the National Auctioneers Association and the people that I have connected to over the last 35 years. I can't do anything to hurt the reputation of the auctioneer, so I'm going to have to pass. That was hard to do, but it was the best thing, and I don't regret it for 1 minute. I think we all have to stand up for the reputation of the auctioneer, and if we can't be a guiding light for the industry, then we need to go do something else.
I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting, right? Because I didn't grow up. I'm not a second generation, third generation auctioneer. Tommy Anderson, by the way, I don't know if you knew his father, Clive Anderson, out here in Tennessee, but just
very familiar
staple in the community.
You know, you realize, you know, I am licensed in Tennessee.
I do know that.
Yeah, so I get around a little bit. It's painful to write those checks to all those states. When I start writing those checks for, you know, Virginia and Florida, and I start wondering, you know, I mean, sometimes, you know, you may not go there one time in 5 years. That's the only painful thing about licenses, is just trying to keep them up. And then you add the real estate license, and it just gets to be something else. But hey, we're just lucky to have them, right?
No, it's a blessing. It's an absolute blessing. And hey, I love the fact that we have to have that, right? You know, because as a consumer, if I was on the other side, and I'll tell you this story, and then I'll let you wrap everything up. Here's my story. And I think it's important because there's some folks out there that might be able to relate to this. When I got out of the military, my military career came to an end. I didn't know it was ending. They told me, hey, you can't do this anymore. And here I am in Kentucky. I was born and raised in Texas. And I was in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Never thought I'd retire or go anywhere after the military except back in Texas. Love Texas. I grew up in the hill country in Kerrville. Graduated high school in Bandera. I've got kids in Corpus and South Padre Island. I mean, I'm all in Texas. So my wife and I decided at that point that maybe Tennessee was the best for us. George Strait wrote a song that alludes to some people that are in Texas that I might not want to visit all the time. So I'm saying all this to say that when I got out of the military, I was going to get a check every month, you know. But it wasn't a check that I would be able to live off of the way that I wanted to. And I've always been a trader, always bought and sold something. And I would go to the local auction house here in Clarksville, Tennessee, and I would stay and I would buy all night long. This was about 10 years ago. But the funny thing is I would find out that there was times that I would stay from start till finish, and there was absolutely nothing there for me. I wouldn't buy anything. And my wife started saying to me, what exactly are you doing? You know, I mean, because I don't do that. I'm not just a person that goes and sits and without a purpose. And I said, there's something about the rhythm, the chant, the activity of an auction that is exciting to me, but even more importantly, it's calming in a weird way. It calmed me down, right? So, I've obviously had been through some scenarios in the military where my brain was affected, and my emotions were affected, but I didn't know this, and this is something for folks out there to listen to. I found out years later that the reason that the auction industry is good for me, Mike, is it's therapy. The auction chant and the ability to have something new every day, the ability to have a fast-moving pace if you want it, a slow-moving pace if you want it, the ability to control your environment as we do, that's therapy for me. So I'm a product of a consumer sitting in the pew, is what it was, in an auction house, and finding out. And then guess what? She said, well, if you're going to sit there all the time, you got to find a way to make money doing it. And then I went to auction school, right? Because mama said you needed to make money. And I fell into it. But it has given me a purpose, like the military did, because I'm a service-related person. I like to help people. The transaction is not that important to me. It's the process from start to finish. I want to know your story and why you're doing what you're doing. And if I can't help you, I'm not going to sign a contract. I'm going to refer you to a professional that can, because if you're out there saying that auctions are the solution to every problem, I simply disagree, and I think you're doing a disservice to the industry. Auctions serve a great purpose, and they're very good for certain situations. And I like that. I like to sit down with whoever it is, investment banker, portfolio banker. If it's a storage auction, doesn't matter to me. From start to finish, seeing that process through is so satisfying to me. And I'm blessed that I get to come into an industry where folks like you have held it to such high standards and kept it to where, I can come in and say, really, what's my limitation, Mike? And that's what's so exciting. You can do and be as successful as you want to be. And all you got to do is get up every morning and go talk to people and help them solve their problems. Listen to them. Don't fix them if you can't. Don't give them a solution that you don't believe in. And love this industry. And I believe that good things will come. And I think that you're kind of a product of that as well. And that's why I respect you taking so much time this evening, just sitting and talking with me.
I appreciate it. That's a great lead into what I was going to say. You literally, you introduced it. And that is, one of the reasons that I was willing to join United Country Real Estate after 27 years of running my own independent auction company. And man, we had it going on. I mean, I loved my business. I loved my company. However, every once in a while, an opportunity comes along you have to listen to. I had 2 or 3 opportunities come along about the same time. One was a friend of mine out of Virginia that everybody knows are one of the biggest companies in Virginia, without me getting specific. He wanted to create a franchise system. He's still in the auction business. He's a big deal. We're still friends today. I had another situation where we were discussing me going with a company, and for some reason, United Country, appealed to me, and I'll tell you why. When I was a kid back in the 60s, living on the farm, and we would drive to Gainesville, Texas, there on US Highway 82, there was a United Farm Agency. United Farm Agency was the forerunner to United Country. And it was an orange and a black sign. And as we're going down US 82, I'd look over, and I would always look at that sign. And for some reason, I'm a big believer that God sends messages to you, and I believe God was telling me you're going to be involved with that someday. And I believe that. So that was always in the back of my mind. Well, here's the other thing. I was a very big supporter of Future Farmers of America. And when I was in radio, I used to go to the Fort Worth, we used to call it the Fat Stock Show, and I mentioned that the other day on my show, the Fort Worth Fat Stock Show and Rodeo. They took the word fat out, because they wanted lean beef. They weren't looking for fat. And I'm not kidding. If you go to Fort Worth, Texas, I want to tell everybody they need to go to Cattleman's Steakhouse in the stockyards, and you'll see pictures of fat stock because that's what the cows looked like back then. But anyway, so I used to cover the fat stock show and rodeo, and I would interview the kids with Future Farmers of America and interview people like Bob Tallman, the greatest rodeo announcer in the world. And I still have all those tapes. In fact, I ought to probably put that on CD. It would be pretty entertaining because Bob Tallman is the greatest rodeo announcer of our time, maybe of all time, probably of all time.
I met him in Stephenville, Texas.
You did?
Yeah, at the high school rodeo finals, I met him there.
He's the greatest. And you and I run in a lot of the same circles. We got a lot of stories we could tell. I can tell you stories about Kerrville, Texas. And I lived in Corpus Christi before we moved to Houston. But my point to this conversation was to get back to you. The reason I joined United Country was because I believed there was a place for auctioneers to sell real estate, not at auction. I believe that you could, which I never did. Until I joined United Country, I literally listed one piece of real estate in Denton, Texas, many years, probably in '84. And I swore I'd never list another piece of real estate. And that was a mistake. I probably left $20 million on the table over a 10 or 15 year period. Now, my goal today is to tell auctioneers of all age, listen, if you want to be a pure auctioneer and only sell real estate at auction, knock yourself out. There are locations in the United States where you can actually do that. There's places like Enid, Oklahoma, where they sell real estate every day at auction. But I'm going to tell you that's auction utopia because most of the United States is not strung that way. And so today, literally with a commercial broker that's a friend of mine here in Dallas, we're working on a $5 to $10 million listing agreement, just north of McKinney, Texas. Now, if you'd have told me 20 years ago that I'd be listing a piece of real estate instead of taking it straight to auction, I'd told you were crazy. But here's the good thing. You need to be able to, wouldn't you rather have a check on a $10 million piece of real estate at a brokerage versus an auction if you can't take it to auction and get it sold? So if you don't want to take it to a traditional brokerage, fine, but learn how to refer it. Get your license and refer it to somebody else and get a cut. And I find it just amazing the people that are arrogant about the auction industry. And I'm not one of those. I used to be. I was very arrogant about the auction industry because it was either auction or nothing. Well, I don't believe that anymore. I believe we can do both. And I think we can complement it. And I also, one of the things that I focus on is I'll take something to traditional real estate brokerage, but I tell them going in every, we're going to talk to them every week about the listing, but every month we're going to review the month. And in 3 to 6 months, somewhere in there, we're going to have another discussion about an accelerated marketing opportunity. And that's going to be an auction, or it's going to be something competitive. I'm going to give them that opportunity because sellers get frustrated. And if you lose the listing, you haven't got anything. So you need to learn how to negotiate these things. And that's one of the things I think I've probably gained the most out of being with United Country. And I'm a stockholder in the company, and I appreciate what we do. And I love all of our agents and brokers out there and auctioneers. We've got about 225 auctioneers, and I think there's something to be said for it. I just love the business. And, if Jesus calls me tomorrow and God says it's time to come home, we'll go. But in the meantime, I hope I fall over dead at 85, signing a $50 million contract.
That would also be auction utopia, right?
It's a way to go. That's one. That's one way to go.
And if you're watching this live or you watch it later, what Mike just told you is probably something you could pay a Zig Ziglar $10,000 to teach you what he just said, because a lot of people go through their career believing it's one way or the other. And I love the fact of having options, knowing what you're good at, bringing in professionals to compensate with what you're not, surrounding yourself with people that are good at the things that you're not. And I think that's something that not only United Country, but a lot of successful businesses throughout the auction industry and the real estate industry do. Mike, I can't thank you enough. It's been a pleasure not only to talk to you, but to stand here or to sit here for an hour and 20 minutes and look at all that Cowboy memorabilia. I think we need to have just another one of these, just simply to talk about the greatest football team in the world. But that's probably for a better time.
How about those Cowboys?
I hear you.
I'll tell you, Shane, real quick.
Sure.
It's funny. A lot of people don't know this, that Jerry Jones does own the Cowboys, and you love him or hate him, and most people hate him. But my legal name is Jerry Jones. And so every credit card I have, my driver's license says Jerry Jones. And a lot of people don't know. They just don't know. Some people don't watch TV. And it's funny when I get the reaction that I do going through TSA and going through an airport, because they do a double take. And literally from where I'm sitting right now, I'm probably less than 10 miles up the freeway to Frisco, Texas, the world headquarters for the Dallas Cowboys. Of course, I'm old school, I'm old school. That's why I got Don Meredith up here. Don Meredith, of course, was the first famous Cowboy. And so since we're sitting here, I'm going to, I got to brag a little bit about my Cowboy. So the helmet is signed by probably 5 of the most famous Cowboys, or 6 of them. It's got Eddie LeBaron, who was the first Cowboy. It's got Don Meredith on it. It's got Troy Aikman. It's got Craig Morton. And it's got one more. I can't remember which one's the last one. But this piece, I get confused because it's like doing the weather. You do the weather here. So right here, this piece that's been signed by all the Cowboys from the 70s, that actually belonged to Craig Morton, who was our quarterback, number 14. And that was his personal piece that he had. And when he sold his memorabilia, I bought that. And then right above my head is the Dallas Cowboys 1960 inaugural pennant. So that's a real one. That's not a duplication. And then right below that is a set of season tickets where they dedicated it to the Ring of Honor. And that's been signed by all the Cowboys in the Ring of Honor, from Tom Landry all the way to Bob Hayes and Tex Schramm. So if you're a Cowboy fan, or you love Dandy Don Meredith, that used to be on Monday Night Football, this is just kind of my shrine to the Cowboys. And then I was telling you early when we were just kind of messing around, back over here somewhere, right here is from the Hoosier Gym in Knightstown, Indiana. And that is a piece of the floor from the gym where they filmed Hoosiers. And I'm a big Hoosiers fan. So whenever I get a little down, if I want to get pumped up, all I got to do is watch Hoosiers. And by the time I get through, I'm ready to take on the world.
Well, I'm not going to spark the country music conversation, but I have followed you enough to know that you and I could talk for hours. And one of the reasons that we live here, to be honest with you, and we can have the argument about if it's country or not, what's going on the radio nowadays. But my wife and I will go to the Grand Ole Opry. I don't know, a couple times a month if we can get away with it. All my girls, we go down there, go downtown to Nashville any chance we get. CMA Fest. Huge fan of everything that's country music, and also some Texas country. So maybe you and I can actually do like a Cowboys or a football / music too, because I could talk for days. Country music got me, is literally the biggest reason we stayed here. It's different here.
Here's something real quick. So
Sure.
Before you became an auctioneer, the National Auctioneer Association had a convention in Nashville, Tennessee.
Oh, and don't tell me the George Jones story, because I'm already envious of that.
That's a different story.
Okay.
But we rented the Ryman Auditorium. And
Really?
yes. And I think it was when I was president. I think I was either president or chairman, but I think I was president at that time. And we were in Nashville. We rented the Ryman, and then we had Diamond Rio as our guest. And so they were our performers that night. And but that was one of our better conventions. But if you watch my cattle show, I ended it the other day by telling everyone that on my podcast, the Mike McGavel Jones Show, on Monday, I'm going to have Rick Goodman. Rick Goodman lives in Brentwood, Tennessee, and he is the surviving family member of the Happy Goodman family, one of the most famous gospel groups of all time. And so if people want to hear some great stories, he's already had these stories with me. George Jones is a part of the conversation. he's invited me to Nashville to do my show at the Ryman Auditorium. So maybe we can figure out a way to include you in that deal. I'd love to do that.
If you need a bodyguard or someone to carry your stuff, whatever you need, I'm in.
Maybe we'll do it. I don't know. We'll do something. How about that?
So I'm in. My family, my daughter and son get to go to school with Jason Crabb. You said gospel, the Crabb family. Jason Crabb goes, his daughter goes to school with ours, and we have every once in a while we'll have a Christmas play at the Christian school, and we get to hear Jason Crabb sing, and what an amazing opportunity that is to listen to the gospel music. But Mike, once again, I can't thank you enough. I appreciate what you do for the industry. I appreciate you being innovative and keeping the auction industry right where it needs to be. I can't thank you enough for being here. If there's nothing else, we're going to get off of here. Guys, join in. How often, tell me, is a certain day that the Mike McGavel Jones shows happens?
We do it. We try to do it every Monday at 10 o'clock. Sometimes we have to go to 11 because of availability. Dan Dotson and I did ours at noon, and we did it live. We had some technical glitches. It was just kind of crazy stuff. It seems like we're having some of those. But I try to do my shows 10 o'clock live, and then we'll do sometimes I'll record a second show so I can put it in the can. When I was traveling all the time, I absolutely would record a show so I could play it. And if you don't mind, I'd like to give a quick shout out again to my buddy Stephen Barr over at Kentucky. We did originally get together and play basketball at Indiana University during CAI. That's one of the times that you're talking about those masterful moments when you become good friends. And the reason Steve and I became friends was because we were playing basketball at CAI. And there's a whole group of guys, from Greg Highsmith, the 94 international champion. I think that's right. It's either 94 or 96. They all start running together for me. But, Troy Lepard up in Enid, Oklahoma, we were all big buddies, and Marty Higginbotham's son was a part of that. And we just had a blast. We became buddies. CAI was one of those things. Scott Swinson, one of my business partners and an instructor at our school, he was there. So CAI is integral. I think it's another piece. Sure. Get indoctrinated and give your shout out to Scott Schumann. I know Scott was on there, our past president. Scott's a great guy. Scott stayed at my condo in Kansas City when he was in town, and just wonderful people. And we're just very blessed to be a part of the auction industry and the network that we have. And thank you so much, Shane, for having me on. And we'll get back together again soon. And I hope to see you in San Diego.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks, guys. If you haven't been watching and you don't understand what's going on, this is my chance to tell you that's the word on the block from Mike McGavel, Shane McCarroll. I'm in Nashville. He's in Dallas. We're going to sign off, and we will see you again soon. Check Mike out on Mondays at 10 o'clock on the Mike McGavel Jones Show. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Shane.